The morning I discovered I was no longer needed began like any other. The September sun streamed through the kitchen curtains, painting soft patterns on the familiar oak table where I had served countless family meals over the years. My coffee sat untouched, growing cold as I stared at my phone, reading the message that tore my world apart, breaking it into 1,000 sharp, painful fragments. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. I thought I knew what the autumn of my life would look like. After 41 years of marriage to Thomas, we had dreams of travel and quiet days. A small RV, perhaps, taking us from one national park to another, finally witnessing the Grand Canyon at sunrise. We had a modest pension, supported by Thomas's woodworking business and my part-time piano lessons. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. We were settled. We were at peace. Or so I thought. Then came the unexpected phone call one rainy Thursday evening in April. Thomas and I were cleaning up after dinner, lost in the comfortable rhythm of washing and drying dishes, when the doorbell rang. A frown passed over Thomas's face as he wiped his hands on a towel. Who could be calling at this hour? I answered it, surprised to find Beverly standing there, mascara streaked down her face, holding 2-year-old Noah in her arms and 3-year-old Zoe clinging to her leg. A single suitcase, too small for what would become a permanent stay, rested at her feet. "Mom," she sobbed. "I can't do this anymore. Craig and I are falling apart. We need some time to figure things out. Can the kids stay with you for just a little while?" I had no time to process the request. As soon as the words left her mouth, I found myself reaching for Noah, pulling him into my arms. "Come inside," I said, already comforting him as he clung to me. Beverly stayed in the house that night, her old bedroom offering a temporary refuge, while the children bunked with us. By morning, she was gone, leaving a note that read simply, "Thank you. I'll call you tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. Weeks turned into months, and Beverly's sporadic phone calls and empty promises to bring the kids home never materialized. Her visits, when they happened, were brief and distant, bringing nothing but toys and excuses. Meanwhile, their lives became our lives. Their clothes overtook the spare bedroom. Their toys cluttered our living room. I took on the daily tasks of motherhood once again. School lunches, late-night fevers, and homework battles. We adjusted, but the strain was palpable. Our quiet retirement, our dreams of travel, slipped further out of reach. The financial strain mounted, as did the emotional toll. I was torn between my commitment to my grandchildren and the resentment that built in my heart. Thomas, too, was feeling the burden. His woodworking shop, his pride and joy, had been converted into a bedroom for the kids. His dreams had shifted to accommodate this new reality. Still, it wasn't enough. We were both growing weary. One night, after yet another missed visit from Beverly, Thomas turned to me. "This isn't what we signed up for, Ellie. This isn't fair to us," he whispered. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He was right. But how could we turn our backs on the children who had already been abandoned once? Then, Thomas reached his breaking point. I had tried to defend Beverly, to rationalize her behavior. She was in therapy. She was trying to rebuild her life. But deep down, I knew I was only making excuses for her. "This isn't a rough patch anymore," Thomas said one night, his voice filled with anger. "It's been 2 years. They're living their best lives while we're stuck raising their kids." He was right. I had known it for a long time, but I was afraid to admit it. I had no choice but to agree with him when he said, "I can't do this anymore." He left. Just like that. And so, I was left alone with the children. The first year was the hardest of my life. With Thomas gone, I took on everything: extra piano students to make ends meet, the repairs around the house that Thomas used to handle. I even sold my grandmother's silver set to pay for Noah's therapy. And yet, through all of this, I kept fighting. I kept showing up for the children. Beverly, meanwhile, continued her sporadic visits. She would show up with more toys, but no help. I was constantly reminded of what had been taken from me, but I had no choice but to keep going. There were moments when I wondered if I could continue like this, raising someone else's children while my own daughter went on with her life. But something changed in me during that time. I became more than just a grandmother. I became their mother in every way that mattered. I was there for every school project, every meltdown, every first lost tooth. I taught them traditions, Sunday pancakes, Friday night board games, summer evenings catching fireflies. We created a family of our own, even if it wasn't the family I had planned. By year 3, Thomas had moved across the country to Oregon. He called occasionally, but our conversations were strained, as if we were both unsure of what to say after so much had changed. I often wondered if I would ever see him again, if Beverly would ever come back for the children. But as the years passed, I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping. I simply lived my life, finding new ways to make it work. And then, unexpectedly, Beverly returned. She showed up for Noah's 8th birthday, on time, with a reasonable gift. She spent the whole day with us, and for the first time in years, she stayed longer than just a few hours. Something in her had shifted. She seemed different, and maybe it was for the best. But even as she returned, I knew things would never be the same. Too much had happened. Too much had been taken from me. I had become a mother to her children, and now she was asking for them back. The first part of this new phase of our lives was beginning, but none of us knew where it would lead. I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of them, not after all we had been through together. But there was more at stake now than my own emotions. These children had been through too much already. Beverly's reappearance brought a flood of memories, of her as a young girl, of her teenage rebellion, of her grief and anger after Thomas left. But I had built a life with these children. I wasn't just their caregiver, I had become their emotional anchor, and I feared the storm it would bring to rip them from the only stability they had known. As the days passed, Beverly's presence became more frequent, but with each visit, I could feel the tension in the air. I could see it in her eyes, this strange mix of guilt, pride, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. She wasn't the daughter I had raised anymore, but a woman who had spent the last few years of her life trying to rebuild, trying to prove herself. And while part of me wanted to embrace that, to believe that she was finally ready to be the mother her children needed, another part of me, the part that had been their mother for so long, resisted. We sat together in the kitchen one afternoon while the kids played in the yard. The house was eerily quiet for a moment, and Beverly spoke up, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I know I haven't been the best," she began, her hands fiddling with the edge of her coffee mug. "I know I've failed you, and I've failed them. But I want to make things right. I want to be the mother they deserve." I couldn't look at her for a moment. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "I don't know if you can fix it, Beverly. 7 years. I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I've given everything I had. These children have been my world. And now you want them back, but I'm not sure they're ready for that." The words hung between us, raw and honest. Beverly's face twisted, a mixture of hurt and determination. "I don't expect you to just hand them over," she said quietly. "But I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that I can do this now." I stared at her, conflicted. It wasn't just trust one was struggling with. It was the fear of losing them. The children had become a part of me in a way that no one could understand. It wasn't just about the day-to-day routines. It was the nights when Noah had nightmares and I was the one who soothed him, the way Zoe would come to me when she needed help with her violin practice or when she felt out of place at school. I had shaped their lives as much as Beverly ever had, maybe even more. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't asking me to forget what I'd done. She wasn't asking me to erase the last 7 years. She was asking for a chance, a real one, to prove herself. Still, as the days turned into weeks, I found myself torn between the woman I had raised and the mother I had become. Every conversation felt like a balancing act. I could see her trying, really trying, but the damage was done. I wasn't sure if we could undo it, or if we should. By the time summer arrived, I had managed to convince myself that maybe, Just maybe, it was time to let go. It wasn't easy, and I spent many nights awake, my mind racing. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the quiet shuffle of Zoe and Noah's footsteps in the hall. And I would wonder what would happen when they no longer needed me like they did now. But Beverly's insistence never wavered. She showed up to meetings, signed the necessary documents, and took every opportunity to prove that she was serious. And when she invited me to dinner one night, I couldn't refuse. I knew it was time to have the conversation that had been brewing for so long. The dinner was awkward, as I expected. Beverly, Keith, and I sat at the table, the children buzzing around, showing off their artwork and asking about upcoming plans. The evening felt like a patchwork of what was, our past, as we danced around the present. And yet, through the discomfort, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A glimpse of the woman who used to be my daughter, the one who had once trusted me with her fears, her dreams, her hopes. At the table, I spoke carefully, choosing my words like I was handling something fragile. "I've been thinking a lot about this," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "About you and the kids and what's best for all of us. We can't change the past. But we can try to move forward. Together." Beverly looked at me, her eyes softening just slightly. "I want to make this work. For them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know that I won't take them away from you. Not completely. I want them to have both of us in their lives. I don't want you to disappear." The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard, but it also broke something in me. I had feared losing them. I had feared that all my years of loving them would be swept away with one signature on a document, one moment of weakness on my part. But Beverly wasn't asking me to disappear. She was asking me to help shape the future. The night ended with tentative smiles, not full of resolution, but an understanding that we could begin to heal the wounds. We weren't there yet, not by a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to something that resembled family again. When I got home that night, Thomas was sitting on the porch swing, looking out at the darkening sky. I sat next to him, exhausted, unsure of what to feel. "You look like you've been through a storm," he said quietly, taking my hand in his. I sighed, my head resting on his shoulder. "It's not over yet. But maybe it's a start." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the quiet of the evening. The air was thick with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were moving in the right direction, together. The summer slipped by in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and visits. It was like walking through a fog, the way the days blended together, the sense of anticipation and dread hanging over everything. I had agreed to a plan with Beverly, but the process of shifting from day-to-day grandparenting to a more distant role was harder than I had imagined. Every time the kids left, it felt like a part of me was being pulled away. I'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of their lives, Zoe practicing her violin in the mornings, Noah barging into the kitchen for his cereal, both of them sharing their latest school gossip. It was more than just routines. It was love. It was the quiet moments, the way they both settled into my arms at night before bed, the little conversations we had about anything and everything, and the way their laughter filled the house. I didn't realize how much I'd come to depend on those sounds until they started to fade. Slowly, but steadily, Beverly's plan was taking shape. The transition was beginning. It was mid-August when the changes hit hardest. Zoe, usually so composed, began withdrawing. It was subtle at first, a few missed violin practices, less enthusiasm for school supplies shopping, but then it became more obvious. One evening, she curled up on the couch, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, looking out the window with a faraway expression. I sat down beside her, hesitant. I had learned to tread carefully with her. "Zoe, you okay?" She didn't answer immediately, her gaze still on the distant tree line outside. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "I'm not sure who I am anymore." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I used to know," she said softly. "But now, everything feels different. I'm not the same here as I am at Mom's house. And I don't even know where I fit at school. Maddie's got her friends, and I'm just me. I swallowed hard, pulling her closer. You're always just Zoe, honey. The same Zoe no matter where you are. You're brave and smart, and you have people who love you. She shook her head. But I'm not sure where I belong. Her confession brought back memories of my own struggles with identity. Though they were different, the essence of it was the same. I know it feels hard right now. But I promise, you'll find your place. It's okay to feel lost for a while. You're still figuring things out, and that's okay. Zoe was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the window. Finally, she turned to me. Can you talk to Mom for me? I don't know how to tell her. I held her tight, stroking her hair. Of course. I'll help. Later that evening, I called Beverly. It wasn't the first time we talked about the kids, but it was the first time I had something really difficult to say. Zoe's struggling, I told her. She feels like she's got to be two different people, at your house and mine, and it's taking a toll on her. She misses her old friends. She's nervous about starting at a new school. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Beverly responded. I've noticed she's been more withdrawn. I didn't realize it was this bad. I could hear the concern in her voice, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a defensive reaction. She wants to talk to you, but she's not sure how. I'll talk to her, Beverly said, the words full of determination. I'm not going to let her feel like this alone. I'll make sure she knows she has a place. I could hear the effort in Beverly's tone, like she truly understood for the first time the delicate balance we all had to find. She wasn't trying to fix everything in one conversation. She just wanted to show up. And that, in itself, was progress. The following weekend, Beverly took Zoe out for a mother-daughter day. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to me. I knew it wasn't the end of the struggle, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter where both of us could co-parent with more understanding. And maybe, just maybe, Beverly could finally step into the role she had fought so long to reclaim. Meanwhile, Thomas and I had our own quiet negotiations. He had moved back in, but we kept our separate spaces, his belongings scattered between rooms like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. We hadn't yet made decisions about the future. But I could see in the small acts of kindness, the way he made me coffee in the mornings or watched the children's soccer practice with quiet pride, that we were moving in the right direction. One night, we sat down on the porch swing again, watching the fireflies dance in the distance. I'm proud of you, Thomas said, his voice low. I turned to look at him, surprised. What for? For everything you've done for them. For all of us. You've held this family together in ways none of us could have. Even when it felt like you were the only one holding the pieces, you didn't give up. The warmth in his voice was different now, softer, less burdened. We've all held on in different ways, I replied. And we're still figuring it out. I know, he agreed. But I'm glad we're figuring it out together. All of us. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, the house nearly silent without the usual commotion. The children had gone to Beverly's, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't the painful silence of absence. It was just quiet. And in that quiet, there was peace. When Thomas came in, he saw the faraway look on my face. You okay? He asked, his tone soft. I smiled, realizing for the first time in a long while that I was. I think so. I'm starting to get used to the quiet. The peace of it. Thomas stepped closer, reaching for my hand. You know, I've been thinking about what's next for us. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He paused for a moment before speaking, his voice steady but filled with a certain vulnerability I hadn't heard before. What if we go back to the Grand Canyon? You've always wanted to see it with me. Just the two of us. We could do that. We could take time for us again. After all this, we deserve it. The idea of a quiet, shared adventure, a moment just for us, felt both foreign and comforting. It was a future I hadn't allowed myself to imagine, not after everything that had happened. But now, for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem impossible. I nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. Maybe we should. As we sat together, talking about what the future could look like, I realized that the road ahead wasn't about reclaiming what had been lost, but about building something new. A future where we didn't just survive, where we thrived. Together. And as Thomas leaned in to kiss me, I realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we were ready. All of us. By the time autumn rolled around, things had settled into a new rhythm. The house was quieter now, but not empty. The kids came and went, and I found myself cherishing those weekends and midweek dinners more than I ever had before. The uncertainty of the past few months had begun to fade into something more manageable. The tension that had clouded my every decision now seemed to dissolve with each passing day. Thomas and I had also settled into a kind of routine. He had moved back in completely, though our separate spaces still existed in the form of his office upstairs, which I respected. There was no rush to close the gap between us. Instead, we allowed the relationship to evolve naturally, with no pressure. He was more present, more engaged, and we had more of those quiet moments that we had missed during our years of separation. Slowly, cautiously, we were rediscovering each other. Zoe and Noah were adjusting, too. Zoe had started to open up more about her feelings. She and Beverly had worked through some of her anxieties, and though the transition wasn't without its bumps, she seemed to be settling into her new life. Noah, on the other hand, was a little more unpredictable. His emotions swung wildly from one visit to the next, but we all tried to be patient with him, understanding that his world was changing faster than he could process. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room, watching Noah play with his action figures on the rug, Zoe came over to sit beside me. Her hair, now a little longer, framed her face like it always did when she was lost in thought. She fiddled with the sleeve of her sweater, her usual fidget when something was on her mind. "Grandma," she began, her voice a little uncertain, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, setting my book aside. I gave her my full attention, sensing that she had something important to say. "Why does everything have to be so different now?" Zoe asked, her brow furrowing as she glanced up at me. "Why can't things just go back to the way they were?" Her words struck me. I had expected Zoe to adjust quicker than Noah, but the depth of her feelings, her longing for the past, for consistency, was raw and real. I took a deep breath and looked out the window for a moment, considering my answer. "I wish I could tell you that everything will go back to the way it was, but it won't, Zoe," I said gently. "Not because it's bad, but because sometimes things change. People change. Life changes." Her eyes filled with unshed tears, and I knew it wasn't the answer she wanted. "But it's not fair. I don't want things to be different. I miss my old friends, and I miss when everything was just easy." I reached for her hand, squeezing it softly. "I know, honey. Change can be really hard, especially when you don't want it. But sometimes, change can be a good thing. You're growing, and so is your mom. So am I, and even your grandpa. We're all doing our best, and that's what matters. We still have each other. That's the most important thing." Zoe turned her face toward me, her lips trembling slightly. "I know. I just don't want to feel like I'm being pulled apart all the time." I smiled, brushing a lock of her hair behind her ear. "You're not being pulled apart, Zoe. You're growing. And sometimes, growing means feeling torn, but it's also how you become stronger. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one day at a time." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. But I saw the faintest spark of understanding in her eyes. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but I hoped it was the one she needed to hear. The transition, though hard, was slowly starting to feel more natural. There was still the occasional bump. Noah had his meltdowns, Beverly and I had our moments of tension, but we were all trying, really trying, to make it work. The weekly check-ins with Beverly, the discussions about the kids' needs, and the conversations between Thomas and me about the future, all of it created a space where we could breathe. Then, one evening, Beverly called with a surprise request. She and Keith were planning a weekend trip, and she wanted to know if I would be okay with keeping the kids for the entire weekend. It was unexpected, but in that moment, it felt like a sign. The kind of sign you get when things are shifting in the right direction, even if it's small. "I'll make sure they're settled in the morning," Beverly said over the phone. "And I'll call to check in." I paused for a moment, considering. This was a big step for both of us. Beverly had been cautious with her trust, but here she was, offering me more time with them. More time than the regular dinners or weekends. "I'd love to," I replied. "Let me know what time you'll be dropping them off." When the kids arrived, it felt different. There was no tension in the air, no undercurrent of uncertainty. It was just us, the way it used to be. I greeted them with open arms, and Noah immediately ran to me, throwing his arms around my waist as if he hadn't seen me in years, not just a few days. "Grandma!" he exclaimed, looking up with his wide, eager eyes. "Grandpa says we can go to the park after lunch. Can we?" "Of course," I said, ruffling his hair. "We'll do whatever you want." Zoe smiled at me from the doorway, a quiet nod of approval in her eyes. I knew this wouldn't be a perfect weekend, but it was a beginning. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful, not just for the children, but for myself, for all of us. By the time Labor Day arrived, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter. Thomas and I had talked more seriously about the future, about what we wanted. And though there was still some space between us, the way he looked at me, the way his hand rested on mine as we sat together, told me we were on the right path. The weekend at the coast was everything we had hoped it would be. We arrived early on Saturday, just the two of us, to prepare the cabin before the kids arrived. I could see the joy in Thomas's eyes as we walked along the shore, picking up shells and talking about the years ahead. When the children arrived, they practically burst into the house, each with a story to tell and a new treasure to share. Noah couldn't wait to show me the shell he'd found, while Zoe wandered to the windowsill, asking if the same shells I had collected when she was younger were still there. It was in that moment, watching them explore and settle into this new space, that I realized how far we had come. The future might have seemed uncertain just months ago, but now it was full of possibilities. Endless, open to us all. And for the first time, I felt ready to embrace it. As the days grew shorter and the crisp chill of autumn settled into the air, the changes that had been taking place over the past year became more evident. The children were getting used to the idea of having two homes, and though there were still some adjustments to be made, they were settling in. I found myself spending more time with them than I had in months. Their laughter in the house, their small daily rituals, it all felt both familiar and bittersweet. One evening, after a particularly long day of helping Zoe with a violin practice and consoling Noah after a minor school mishap, I collapsed into the couch beside Thomas, who had been reading in his chair. The house, once so full of bustling activity, now felt quieter without the constant presence of the kids. "How was your day?" he asked, looking up from his book with a soft smile. I exhaled deeply, sinking further into the cushions. "Busy. But good, I think. The kids are doing well. But I still can't help but notice how much quieter the house is now. It's strange." He set the book down and turned to face me. "It's a big shift. I can imagine how tough it is to get used to. I'm sure there's a part of you that misses the constant chaos." I nodded. "It's not just the noise. It's the presence. The feeling that the world isn't revolving around us anymore. I miss being needed in the way I used to be." Thomas reached out and took my hand. "You're still needed, Ellie. Just in different ways." His words were comforting, but they didn't erase the underlying grief that lingered. I had devoted so much of my life to caring for Zoe and Noah. And now, as they began to grow more independent, I found myself standing on the edge of something I wasn't quite sure I was ready for. The empty spaces in the house were starting to mirror the emptiness I felt inside, a part of me still adjusting to the loss of my role as their primary caretaker. That night, after dinner, I took a walk alone down the quiet street, the cold air brushing against my face. I had always walked to clear my head, to think things through, and tonight was no different. But with every step, It became clearer that I had to reconcile this new chapter in my life, both as a grandmother and as a woman who was rediscovering herself after years of tending to others. The next few weeks were marked by small moments of peace and profound introspection. I found myself slowly opening up to the idea of what it might mean for me to step into this next phase of life. My relationship with Thomas continued to grow, each day adding a layer of trust and understanding. He had been patient with me, understanding that the transition wasn't just about the children, it was about us, too. One evening, as we sat together on the porch swing after the kids had left for their weekend with Beverly and Keith, Thomas turned to me, his expression more serious than I'd seen in weeks. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. "Maybe it's time for us to start making some long-term plans. Not just for the kids, but for us." I turned to face him, intrigued. "What do you mean by that?" He ran a hand through his hair, clearly gathering his thoughts. "I mean, well, we've been back together for months now. Things are better between us, right?" I nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "Yes. Things feel different. Better." Thomas smiled at my response, but it quickly faded into a thoughtful expression. "I want us to be more than just surviving this time. I want us to thrive. To have dreams, goals that are just ours, not always centered around the kids or the house. We've spent so much time taking care of others, Ellie, that I feel like we've lost sight of ourselves. Of what we want together." His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. For so long, everything had been about the kids, their needs, their adjustments, their schedules. We had put our own desires on hold, operating in survival mode. But now, with the kids becoming more settled in their new lives and our relationship finding a new rhythm, I realized that I hadn't really thought about what I wanted next. For myself. For us. "I never really thought about it that way," I admitted softly, looking out over the yard, now dark except for the glow of the porch light. "But you're right. I've been so focused on what I'm losing that I forgot to think about what I might gain. What we could do, just the two of us." Thomas gave me a knowing look, his eyes warm. "Exactly. We've always talked about things we wanted to do. Traveling, taking up new hobbies, even just enjoying time alone together again. It doesn't have to be huge, but I think it's time we start thinking about what's next for us. Not just what we've had, but what we can build going forward." I smiled, my heart swelling with the unexpected joy of this conversation. It wasn't something I had considered, but it felt right. As the years had passed, I had become so accustomed to the role of grandmother, of caregiver, that I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be just Ellie. To have dreams that were about me, not defined by the responsibilities I'd taken on. The next few weeks were a blur of small but significant changes. I found myself considering things I hadn't thought about in years, things like taking that art class I had once dreamed of, or traveling to places I had always wanted to see. Thomas, too, seemed to be thinking more about his own future. We began talking about planning a trip, just the two of us, perhaps to the Grand Canyon, something we'd always wanted to do but never had the chance. As we talked, it became clear that we weren't just planning a trip. We were beginning to rebuild. The small things, like picking out places we'd visit, dreaming about the future, were the foundation of something bigger, something more meaningful. But even as we planned our future, there was still a delicate balance. I wanted to be there for Zoe and Noah as they continued to adjust. I wanted to respect Beverly's role as their mother and continue building the fragile but growing relationship we had. The work wasn't done yet. But as I looked ahead, I saw possibilities, not just for the children, but for all of us. One afternoon, a month later, Beverly called. She was having a rough day, and she wanted to talk. I braced myself, but as we sat down together over coffee, I realized just how much our dynamic had changed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was simply a mother who was struggling with the reality of everything. "I feel like I'm not doing enough," she confessed, looking down at her hands, the way she always did when she felt vulnerable. "Like I'm failing them. They've been so resilient, but I don't know if I'm doing the right things." "Beverly," I said softly, placing my hand on hers. You're doing the best you can. They know you love them. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to show up, like you always have. She met my gaze, a mix of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes. It's just hard. I don't want them to think I'm abandoning them. I'm afraid of losing them again. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. You won't lose them. You're their mother. And we're all here for them. It's just going to take time, all of us adjusting. But we'll do it together. Beverly nodded slowly, and I could see the shift in her eyes. The resentment, the fear, it was still there, but it was tempered with something new. Acceptance, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. The days continued to pass, each one bringing new moments of understanding, small wins, and ongoing challenges. But as the months went on, I began to see a clearer picture of what was ahead for us all. Not perfect, but whole. Not without struggles, but full of the possibility of healing. One evening, after another long day of helping the kids adjust, I found myself sitting on the porch with Thomas again, watching the sun set over the horizon. It had become our quiet time, our moment of connection after the chaos of the day. You know, I said, turning to him with a smile, I think we're doing it. We're finding our way back. Thomas nodded, squeezing my hand. We are. One step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Whatever came next, we would face it together.